So, good morning, evening, afternoon, everyone. It's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Carmen Arguedas. She is professor, Universidad Autónoma de Madrid. She is an environmental economist. She contributed a lot of papers to most important journals in the area. So thank you very much, Carmen, for accepting my invitation. And so the floor is yours. You have 1 hour, including questions, and this is a very friendly seminar. Normally, if someone has a question or a clarification, he or she jumps during the meeting, unless you prefer otherwise.
Okay, thank you very much, George, for the kind invitation and also the introduction. So I'm really happy to contribute to your webinar. So obviously, I am very happy to take questions as we go. So please feel free to interrupt, especially because this is a work in progress thing. So all the feedback is really appreciated. So what I'm going to present today is a joint work with Paco André from Complutense in Madrid, Claudia Ranocchia, that is now in Tilburg University, enjoying a postdoc position, and Sandra Rousseau from KU. And I want to talk about peer-to-peer sharing, price competition, and consumers awareness. Our paper, our project that belongs to say wider let's say set of questions that we have can be framed within the circular economy. So in Europe, if we look at the European Union Circular Economy Action Plan for 2020, the European Parliament defines the circular economy as a model which involves sharing, leasing, reusing, repairing, refurbishing, recycling, etc., to extend products' life as much as possible and minimize waste. I have been searching that in the US and also in Canada, there are like similar strategies regarding recycling, reducing plastic waste, promoting national and state initiatives of circular systems, etc. And the idea is, as I said, to keep materials and reduce waste as much as possible. In this presentation, and also in this longer, wider project that we have, we focus on sharing, leasing, and reusing. Basically, this can be embedded into what we call sharing systems. And within sharing systems, we want to analyze collaborative consumption, or what is called peer-to-peer sharing, or P2P sharing. What is this about? For sure, you are familiar with some of these platforms in which people can go there and try to buy or sell second-hand goods. Not only buy or sell, but also probably rent or even donate at some point. So eBay and Facebook Marketplace are two very popular platforms all over the place. I have been searching that I think Kijiji is, as far as I've been reading these days, is very popular in Canada. Also, Garage Sale and some others in the US. All these that you have in the first row are general platforms. So basically, you can find all sorts of stuff. But then in the second line, you have more, let's say, well, for example, Postmark, that is also, I think, popular in US and Canada, is only devoted to clothes. Sprint Lister is for sports in general, but for bikes in particular. Share B is for free space rental. And for example, Traveling Munchkin is for kid equipment. And there are many thousands of platforms all over the world in which these individuals can can buy, sell secondhand. So there's really a booming due to all this availability of platforms. There are two key drivers in P2P sharing. So we can talk about individuals' attitudes, but also the role of firms. So if we start with the first one, with individual attitudes, then we are going to have some individuals willing to share or sell their own belongings. We are going to be referring to these people as prosumers, and basically the marketing literature refers to these people as this because of the double role I will describe later. And also some other individuals willing to borrow or buy used items from others, and we will call them users. In a recent survey that we have conducted in Spain in 2025, So this was a survey done for a representative sample of the Spanish population. And then we found that around 20% of respondents were either infrequent or frequent buyers. So we could call them as users of the platform, or people that buy in the platform. Around 25 declared to be sellers, either infrequent or frequent. So this 25% are what we call prosumers. And there were like 30% of the population that either buy or sell, or that they had the double role. So only 24% of the respondents declared that they had never used a platform of this kind to do this sharing or buying, selling secondhand. Apart from that, apart from individuals willing to share or willing to sell or willing to buy, we also asked, because we wanted to see that there were some, economic and social motivations related to this behavior. And then what we found was that, the main reason why people go secondhand is to save. So there is a, let's say, big economic motive behind going secondhand, but also in the second place, we had these two characteristics related more to social motives, to reduction related directly to the reducing waste that apparently people think that happens when you go secondhand, and also sustainability in more general terms. So we could say that this was, if we combine the two, this was like a second main motive to go secondhand. There were also barriers, but for the purpose of today's presentation, I just confirm with this representative sample that there are economic but also social motives. So from individuals, we have the firms, and the role of firms is key as providers of goods suitable to enter the circular trend. So sharing markets, of course, will need to be fitted, right, by goods with certain quality or durability properties. But then what would be the incentives to produce goods suitable to be shared? Because obviously sharing markets are going to be competitors. So why should firms fit them? On the other hand, firms may also face additional competition from lower quality varieties at lower price, right? So the firms, in order to produce these goods that will be able to enter the circular trend, face this kind of dilemma. And obviously, this dilemma the firms face is also fitted by this role of individuals' motivations in shaping incentives. So with all that, our research question is, do firms have incentives to produce goods suitable to enter the circular trend? Under this set of circumstances, first, competition from sharing markets. So you have a direct competitor, a second-hand competitor, competition in markets for new products, maybe additional competition from firms producing lower quality varieties that can attract consumers. And also consumers with economic and social motivations for going second-hand. Why is this important? Well, when we went and checked the literature, the related literature on P2P sharing, we found that mainly this literature is empirical. So we have a set of papers starting from 2011 that basically question, to some extent, the alleged environmental benefits of sharing platforms. So these benefits, obviously, if you go and click in any of the sharing platforms that I was showing you before, they typically take for granted, or this is one of the marketing things they say, right? So we are sustainable, we want to keep the planet safe, etc. So all these benefits are taken for granted, but then all this literature finds many problems, such as rebound effects, lower costs and increased access to goods, a boost in purchasing power if you are going to be buying cheaper, increased transportation needs, a big problem with all this second-hand boom, and then mental spillover effects or moral licensing. So, well, but also the four of us in the group are theory people, right? And we found, well, fewer theoretical approximations. So from those, I would like to highlight the contributions by Einaf et al., Yang and Tan, Ben Jafar et al. All these people work in marketing departments. They are very, very good scholars, of course, but they focus in their papers on characteristics of the platform themselves. And then there is this paper of our own released last year, in which we really try to see which is this, first hand versus second hand, so the combination of the two markets together, the interaction between these two markets, right? So this is the first attempt in order to see whether we can find one of these problems that were found in the empirical literature. So this is basically the main literature that we are looking at. So that's the closest to our study. And obviously, we also obviously take into account a standard IO on product differentiation models, because in the end, as you are going to see, our model is going to be one of product differentiation, also environmental product differentiation, and also some older literature on second-hand markets, right? That and then take into account all these environmental effects. So I think it's probably good to make a small break to see if there is any question. Okay, so then I will continue with the model. The model is something very stylized. So we have a first-hand market and a second-hand market, or a sharing or P2P sharing market. And then we have three types of agents. So we have firms. We are going to have, let's say, prosumers, and these prosumers are going to be having this interconnecting role between the first hand and the second hand market. And then we will have users of the platform in the role of buyers. So then we will, on the one hand, we can determine first-hand prices by the interaction of these firms with these prosumers. And on the other hand, these prosumers will be at the same time suppliers of the unit they have previously bought. So they will constitute the supply that, together with the demand, will form use or shared prices. That's the idea. So let me now explain the role of each type of individual in the next slides. So if we go and see what is the behavior, what is the firm side, we assume that we have two firms equal 1 and 2. So basically what we had in our previous paper in André 24 was a monopoly, right? And now we are looking at this competition also from the first-hand market. So two firms decide two things in this order. So in the first thing these firms decide is the type of variety to be supplied in the first-hand market. So there is a standard variety with a marginal cost of 0, and a circular variety with a marginal cost of C that is going to be positive, right? So basically we consider, as I said before, if the circular variety is going to be the one that is suitable to be shared in the sharing platforms, and therefore it's going to have some features, durability properties, etc. And this justifies that it can be more costly than a standard variety that cannot be shared in the platform later. So once the firms have decided the type of variety they are going to be producing, then they decide the unit price for that variety with a very simple profit function, which is simply, the gap between price and marginal cost times the quantity they sell in the market. And then we assume that firms compete in prices, or firms compete à la nage. Okay, so that's about firms. So very simple. If we now look at the individuals, we assume that we have a mass of individuals normalized to 1. And then each individual, we assume they can buy at most 1 unit of 1 variety of the good. This is a typical assumption in IO models. So individuals are heterogeneous, with respect to a parameter psi. And this parameter, or the degree of heterogeneity of consumers, is simply the proportion of time that individuals are willing to use the good for themselves, right? So basically, I buy a washing machine, and then I have a psi, that is something idiosyncratic of myself, which means I put the washing machine for operation, let's say twice a week, right? Or a given amount of hours per week, for example. And this psi follows a uniform distribution in the interval 0a with density function 1 over a, right? So this is why we have this normalization to 1, and this a, the larger the value of a with a limit of 1, so this 1 would be, I'm using the good 100% of the time, right? So this a being very large will mean that we will have a very heterogeneous population, and a being smaller will mean that the population is not that heterogeneous with respect to this feature, which is the proportion of time that I use the good for myself. Okay? Okay, so with these characteristics, individuals can be of 3 possible types. So they can either purchase 1 unit of the standard variety. So let's say 1 unit of the cheap variety that is not going to be in good conditions to be shared in the sharing platform once I have finished my own use. Purchase 1 unit of the circular variety, the one with a larger, let's say, quality features, and offer it in the sharing market if possible, right? So individuals can be, let's say, prosumers, right? So I buy 1 unit in the first market, and then after I use it, I offer it in the sharing market, and then, if possible, not always, if possible, I may find a match. And then the third possibility would be, well, I don't want to purchase any of the 2 possible goods in the primary market, and then I'm going to access the good in the second-hand market. If I do that, I can only access the circular variety because it's the only type of good that is going to be available there, and I will do it also if possible, right? So if I find a partner willing to sell or willing to rent the good. So once we have defined the possible roles of individuals, let me explain what is the characteristics of the utility preferences of these types of individuals. So the consumers of the standard variety will derive utility from the proportion of time they use the goods for themselves, minus the price of the good. Up to here, everything is standard. Let me talk about this a bit later. If you were a prosumer, again, you enjoy utility for the proportion of time you use the good for yourself. You also pay a price, right? I leave this for later. If you are a user of the circular variety, this means that you enjoy the time you use it for yourself, minus, this is going to be the price in this case, right? And what are the new components? The first component is this parameter that we call it yield. So this parameter was also, it's also present in other papers, for example, in Conrad, and it's a kind of a way, an easy way to incorporate consumers' awareness in the problem, right? So this yield parameter means if I were a consumer of the standard variety, I would enjoy for the time I use the goods for myself, I have to pay the price, and then I'm going to suffer a bit because I'm conscious that I'm not making a good decision regarding, let's say, environmental concerns, right? So this is the yield parameter that we have here that is going to play a very important role in our analysis. On the other hand, if instead of consuming the standard variety, I go for a circular variety, then apart from enjoying the good, the proportion of time I'm going to do it for myself, apart from paying the price, then I have a new component here that is the expectation of what I'm going to earn if I put this good in the market, in the second-hand market, for the time I'm not going to be using the good for myself, right? So basically what I have here is a component that is going to be crucial also for the results, because this, let's say, forward-looking behavior is going to mean that prosumers will increase their willingness to pay for the circular variety. And in fact, what we have here is, you say you have this user price here times the amount of time that I'm not going to use the good for myself. So I put this item in the just for rent or for sale in the secondary market. I cannot ensure that I'm going to be taking these extra revenues, and therefore what beta means is the probability of accessing the sharing market. In other words, the probability of finding a partner in the sharing market. This beta, as you see, is also present in the user's utility function, right? So if, for example, if people doesn't find a partner, then users will have zero utility, right? So maybe I will call, well, of course, I'm going to talk about this beta later because this beta is important, but we tend to refer to this beta as the degree of maturity of the sharing market. So basically, a very small beta means it's very difficult to find partners, maybe it's because there are lots of transaction costs, or maybe because consumers don't trust or whatever. But a large beta may mean that it's quite easy after some time to get partners in the second-hand market. Okay, so this is the definition of the three types of utilities associated to the three types of decisions these individuals can make. So one thing we can do now is to rank these individuals according to the theta they have. And by looking at the expressions I have presented you so far, we can rank the three types of individuals always in this way, right? So consumers of the standard variety will be those that are going to be using the good for a high proportion of their time. Prosumers will be those that, well, they will be using the good for some lower proportion of the time because the other part, they will put the good for others and then may take a revenue. And finally, we will have these users that are going to be using the good very occasionally and therefore have the lowest possible C. Obviously, this is not the only configuration we may have. So this would correspond to the case in which the two varieties are available in the market, and therefore we have the three possible roles of individuals. But obviously we can have a situation in which the circular market does not exist, and therefore consumers can only access the standard variety. So in that case, consumers either go for the standard variety or purchase nothing. And there is another case in which the standard variety does not arise in equilibrium. And in this case, we have a fully circular market in which some people purchase the circular variety, and then other people go second-hand and access this good there. Okay, so basically, this is the case we analyze in our GIM paper, in the 2024 paper, but in the context of a monopoly, right? So so we call standard, this is the standard equilibrium, let's say, so a situation in which there is no circular market, a hybrid equilibrium in which we have the two types of varieties, and then a fully circular equilibrium in which we only have the circular variety in place. So you can imagine, since we are having a model of competition in prices, if only the standard variety or only the circular variety are present in the market, then firms are trapped into the Bertrand paradox, right? So zero profits in these two cases. So only the hybrid situation will be the one that will allow firms to make some profits. And this is very important, right? Because if the hybrid equilibrium exists, this equilibrium dominates either the standard or the circular equilibrium for the two firms. So the fact that the hybrid equilibrium may not exist is because of some conditions that we are going to see later. Okay? Okay, so basically, what is the problem that we need to solve? Well, so we have three markets in this model. So we have consumers of the standard variety, and obviously there will be, that's a demand in the primary market of the standard variety, also a demand of the circular variety in the primary market for the circular good. These prosumers will also act as suppliers of the circular variety once they have consumed a proportion of the good for themselves. And then we have the users that don't buy in the first market and access the circular good in the sharing market, right? So basically we have one equilibrium here, the equilibrium for the second-hand market, and then two equilibria for each one of the two possible varieties that we can have in the first-hand market. So we have demand equals supply for the standard good, demand equals supply for the circular good, and the three markets are going to be interrelated. Is there any question? Okay, so let me go to the results. First thing we have done is to characterize the hybrid equilibrium. Remember the equilibrium in which we have the two varieties of the good. For exogenous R, remember that R is the use price, is the price that we find in the second-hand market. Why are we doing that? Well, this is the first step, because as you will see later, when we endogenize everything, we cannot find analytical solutions, so we have to rely on simulation. So this is just to have we are testing waters, let's say, with this first exercise that we are doing. So we have like two main results. The first is that upon existence of the hybrid equilibrium, so if the conditions for the existence are fulfilled, then we can find explicit expressions for all the equilibrium variables, right? So for equilibrium prices, quantities, and profits for given parameters. So the parameters, remember, are the use price, so the price in the secondary market, the marginal cost of producing a circular variety, the degree of maturity of the sharing market, how different are consumers, and also the yield parameter. So the first good news is that we can find explicit expressions for the equilibrium. And then the second proposition that we have written in this part is that, well, again, upon existence, then the price of the circular variety is always larger, obviously, because this good is going to be produced with a larger cost, so it's going to be more costly. And under certain conditions for the yield parameter, we see that the circular variety can beat the standard variety both in terms of market share and profits, right? So it is not obvious that the firm that produces the circular variety is going to perform better than the one that performs the standard variety. For that, we need the yield parameter to be sufficiently large. Let me explain this with a figure. So in this figure, for example, this is a figure for a low yield, right? For a G equal 0.07, this is simulation, right? This is invented data, but this is just for you to understand. So what we have here in the horizontal axis is R, is the price of the second-hand market. Remember that this will be endogenized later, but for the time being, it is considered exogenous, right? And what we have here in the vertical axis are prices of the two goods in the primary market. So the red is for standard and the blue is for the circular. So we can see that these prices are going to be increasing with R, which makes a lot of sense because these goods are going to be substitutes. This yellow line corresponds to the price under a fully standard case, so a case of Bertrand paradox in which the two firms produce the standard good. So the first thing we can see, as usual in IO models, is that when we add this differentiation, so two firms producing different things, we escape from Bertrand paradox and suddenly prices are above the marginal cost. That's the first thing. So, and then if we look at the second graph, the second one is about the quantity that each firm produces. Again, this is the circular firm, the blue, and this is the standard firm. And we see that with respect to the fully standard case, we see that once we consider the hybrid equilibrium, there is an expansion effect on the firm that produces that stays under the standard variety, as opposed to the circular case. But as long as R increases, as long as the price in the secondary hand market increases, then the quantity offered of the circular good increases, and the opposite thing happens with the standard variety, right? Still, you can see that the quantity of the standard variety is higher, but it converges a bit to the other one as long as the price of the second-hand market increases. In the final graph, we have profits, right? And for profits, we have a similar thing in the sense that, well, R increasing means that profits for the circular variety are going up. So this means that the firm that produces the circular variety will be benefited by the fact that the price in the second-hand market increases, right? And the other firm will experience a decrease in profits. But as you can see, the profits for the circular firm are much lower than the other one. This is for a small g. When g increases and we repeat the exercise, we see a fundamental difference regarding what I told you before, right? So now, for a larger g, the quantity that is finally offered of the standard variety is very small. The other one is beating the standard one. And in terms of profits, now the firm offering the circular variety gets more profits than the other one, right? So here we can see that two things, I would say, or two first messages, which is G is going to matter a lot. And the other thing is that R, the juice price in the second-hand market, is going to be affecting profits positively, profits of the circular firm. Okay. But obviously, our aim is to endogenize everything, endogenize the sharing market, because it can be the case that in the exercise that I have shown you before, some of these R's that I was showing were not equilibrium. So in the end, we need to endogenize it. So the first thing I want to show you, our first interest is to see when this equilibrium, when the different equilibria exist for different values of the parameters. So I remind you that G is the yield parameter, C is the marginal cost of producing the circular variety, and then, in the first place, we are going to see exactly what happens when we vary the yield parameter and the marginal cost parameter for given heterogeneity of consumers and then for given maturity of the sharing market. And we have something like this, which is, I think, very intuitive. So what we have here in the horizontal axis is the marginal cost of production. And here we have the yield parameter. So we can see in all this dotted area, okay, is where we have the hybrid equilibrium. This means that outside this area, some conditions for the hybrid equilibrium, conditions that have to do with, let's say, quantities of the different varieties being positive, prices being in the correct range, etc., are not fulfilled, okay? So the hybrid equilibrium is somewhere in the middle, and this could correspond to the cases in which the standard equilibrium will show up. And this, as you see, corresponds to a case in which producing the circular variety is very expensive, right? And consumers do not have that much yield, right? So with these combinations of parameters, high marginal cost of producing a circular variety and low yield, the standard variety, the standard equilibrium will, fully homogeneous standard will arise. On the other hand, we can have also cases in which only the circular variety will arise, so we will have a fully homogeneous circular case in which, as opposed to the standard case, we have low enough marginal cost of production, producing the circular variety, and also high enough yield, right? And then here there is, in this case, a very small range of values of, very large C and also very large G, in which there will be no market for any of the two varieties. So this is what we can find for a given beta and a given A, right? But the next exercise we can do is to see how this figure changes with beta and with A. And this is what we did next. So the figure that you have here on the top left is what I have just described. And for example, what you have to the right, I don't think if you can see what is in the top part, but this corresponds, the case that we have here on the top right, corresponds to a case with the same heterogeneity of consumers, but with more maturity, meaning with more probability of finding partners in the second-hand market. And what happens is something that is quite intuitive in the sense that you see all this fully standard homogeneous case disappears, right? So once we have more maturity of the sharing market or more possibilities to find partners, so this market, the second-hand market, is more liquid than it was before, so less, let's say, transaction cost, this area ceases to exist, and we have a full case for either only circular varieties or a hybrid case. Now, if you compare the same figure, right? So the top left with the bottom left, here what we can see is for a same beta, so for a same maturity, what happens if we now consider that the population of individuals is more heterogeneous, right? So what happens if the C parameter has a longer interval than we have here, right? So basically what happens is that we have a much bigger area for ST, right? Much bigger area for the fully homogeneous case, the fully standard case. And also it seems that this area shrinks a bit, right? So in principle, increasing this heterogeneity of consumers may go a bit against against circularity, in the sense that we have a bigger area for the standard case. Remember that these two squares are comparable, because here, in the upper one we have corrected for the density, right? So the two are fully comparable. And what we have here in the bottom right is, now we have a larger maturity also combined with larger heterogeneity. So as compared to this one that we have on the top, we have now this standard, fully standard equilibrium arising again, but compared to this case on the bottom left, in which we had fewer heterogeneity, now, fewer maturity, having more maturity is going to affect positively the presence of the circular varieties. Okay, so now once we have seen when, first, if the hybrid equilibrium exists, and also how likely it is that exists under different configurations, now we can pass to the next exercise, which is to see what happens, for example, if we what happens when we change the yield parameter, this parameter that has to do with consumers' awareness. What happens if we change the marginal cost of the circular variety, sharing market maturity, and consumer heterogeneity on the hybrid equilibrium, right? So now that we have seen the areas in which the equilibrium exists, we want to see what is the effect of these variables, of these parameters on the equilibrium variables. So the first thing I'm going to show you is the effect of the yield parameter, right? So we have the yield parameter here in the horizontal axis of these 4 graphs. Here, basically, we are adding a new graph to the picture that I was showing you before, because now the secondary price is also endogenous. So we have the figure for the effect on the secondary price, the prices of the two varieties in the first-hand market, the quantities in the first-hand market, and also profits. For example, if we first look at the solid lines in all the graphs, the solid lines correspond to a case in which the degree of maturity is not very high, right? A case in which we have a low probability of finding partners in the secondary market. So for that, we can see, for example, that an increase in the yield parameter will decrease this price in the secondary market, maybe because increasing the yield parameter has a direct effect on decreasing the quantity of the good, decreasing the demand for the standard good and increasing the demand for the other one, for the circular good. Regarding prices, we see that the yield parameter affects the two prices in different ways, right? So the price of the circular variety increases due to this higher demand, because yield means consumers will stop purchasing the standard variety, so there will be a pressure on the demand of the circular good, and less pressure demand on the other price, right? Because there will be people stopping purchasing the standard good. And regarding the quantities, we can see that, for example, the circular variety is going to increase in terms of production when the yield parameter increases, and then the standard variety will decrease its production. What we have here, this other solid line, is the sum of the two, right? Meaning the overall market quantity. This will be helpful for later. And then regarding profits, we see that this yield parameter obviously decreases a lot profits or sharply, let's say, the profits for the standard variety, and then increases a bit the profits for the circular variety, right? Now, if we look at the dashed lines, the dashed lines have same type of sense that I have described, but now they represent a case of more maturity in the market. And then we can see that under a more market mature, the price in the secondary hand market will go down by a lot. And then we will have an increase in the price of the circular variety, a decrease of the price in the standard variety, and then also a decrease in the quantity of the standard variety, increase in the quantity of the circular variety, and you see a big drop of profits for the standard case and a tiny increase in the profits for the other case, right? So it seems that yield increases very, very little the profits for the circular variety. If there is a bit more of maturity, then profits are going to increase a bit, but there do not seem to be big changes here. Since change a bit, if we now consider another case in which we have more heterogeneity of consumers, right? The previous case was done for heterogeneity for an A equal to 0.5. So now we do repeat the same exercise with a larger, larger differences in consumers' tastes regarding the amount of time they use the good for themselves. And here we can see some changes. So, for example, one thing that we can see, I don't have time to explain everything, but one thing we can see, for example, is that in contrast with the opposite case, now we can have an overall inflation of all the prices, right? So both the two prices in the first-hand market and the price in the secondary market can increase due to a more mature market. So this is something that has to be taken into account when we look at consumers' welfare, right? At consumers' surplus. Regarding the other parameters, there are no much changes, at least in qualitative terms. The only thing I think it's worth to discuss is that as opposed to the previous case that we had before, now we see that the circular variety can beat the standard variety in terms of market share, so in terms of the quantity, and also in terms of profits, right? So it seems that this yield parameter is going to be affecting positively the profits and also the amount of the good that is going to be produced in a circular way. But we also need some heterogeneity of consumers. Otherwise, this is going to be very, very little. So we can now do another exercise with the marginal cost, which is something that we also like it to do, because we think it's also a very relevant parameter in all these stories. What we can see, for example, if you look at profits, first thing, if you see that the curves are cutting at some points, because the equilibrium does not longer exist for these high values of the marginal cost, meaning that the system enters into the fully circular. So basically here you see when the marginal cost increases, we see that the profits for the circular variety decrease. This is very intuitive, and the profits for the other variety are going to increase. Here it's the same thing that happens with the quantity of the circular variety, so marginal cost decreases, obviously affecting the quantity of the good produced in a negative way, as opposed to the other case. If we add the two, right, remember that this was this green line, we have, as a result, an overall increase in production. So this is something that is probably a bit controversial, but this is something that we have here. Regarding prices, nothing surprising. So marginal cost increases and the prices of the two varieties increase. There is also, you see here, we cannot really see what happens with the different degrees of the maturity of the sharing market, because we are going to have a crossing point at some point here. This is done for a given degree of guilt, but if we repeat this exercise for a lower degree of guilt, in particular for a degree of guilt equal to 0, we start seeing some, let's say, weird, or not weird, but some counterintuitive properties. Because, for example, the fact that when the marginal cost increases, then we no longer have that effect on profits and decreasing. In fact, in this case, profits for the firms are very small. But remember that this is because we have a case in which there is no guilt, right? And this was a case that was not very good for these firms. But what we can explain from here is that you see this marginal cost increase has a positive impact on the secondary price, the price in the second-hand market. And if you remember what I was telling you like half an hour ago, an increase in the second-hand price has a positive effect on the profits of the firms. So basically what happens here is that there are two effects that are very salient or very prominent when we have a G very small. On the first hand, the margin and increase in the marginal cost may decrease the profits of the circular variety. This is the direct effect, but on the other hand, this increase in the marginal cost may induce an increase in the secondary hand price that may move profits in the other way. So this may justify that in this case, we have basically no effect at all, right? Okay, the last thing I wanted to comment, and then maybe leave some room for questions, is that we are now at the moment of looking at welfare effects. Before I have told you something about that. For example, when I was commenting about the inflation, general inflation in the free markets, but this exercise is different. And here we are interested in seeing. Well, yeah, we are talking a lot about the hybrid equilibrium, the fully circular. It seems that, or we buy the idea that the circular market is going to be good, but can you do a simple exercise that consists of computing the overall quantity that is going to be produced in the hybrid equilibrium and compare it with the case in which we only have the standard variety, right? And we found something very surprising. Well, not that surprising if you look at the empirical literature, but something that is consistent with that, which is that for all these parameter configurations that we have tried, all these red areas are pointing the message that, okay, watch out. That's a problem, right? Because the market quantity, the overall quantity that is going to be produced under circularity can be larger than that produced under the fully standard case. And this, of course, as you see, for all these cases, and in particular in these situations that correspond to larger values of the guilt parameter. So the guilt parameter on the one hand may be good in order to incentivize firms to produce goods suitable to enter the circular trend. So this is something that we need, but on the other hand, it may cause this problem. So with this, I would like to conclude. So with very few 4 takeaways. The first, that the guilt parameter is key. So firms producing the circular variety outperform those producing the standard variety only if G is large, particularly, as I have shown you before, with enough heterogeneity. Second, a mature sharing market is good for the firms offering the circular version, right? So it's going to be very good, very profitable, that sharing markets perform well, are liquid, but may cause some overall increase in prices that we have seen that it is not always the case, but we have to check really in what cases we may have this issue. The third one is that a more costly circular variety can also cause counterintuitive effects due to its positive impact on the second-hand price. This may have some policy implications. I haven't had the time to go over this in detail, but basically in the last example we have seen, increasing the marginal cost instead of decreasing the circular quantity may increase it, right? So we could have some issues there. And finally, warning, overall production can be larger with circularity. Simply some, propaganda about some ongoing projects that that are related to the one we have I have explained. So we have this discrete choice experiment model that tries to assess these individual attitudes that I was explaining here in the paper. And also we are under a new project in which basically what we want is to see how our results would change if the firms themselves start launching their own circular hubs, which is something that we are observing in the last 2 years in many companies. So with this, I think I will conclude, and I'm very happy to take questions and comments. Thank you.